To grow. Verb. To spring up, to increase, to expand. To develop. To have an increasing influence. To cultivate, to raise, to produce, to breed, gather, glean, to harvest, ripen, bloom, and to advance. To promote the development of. I think we all know what it means to grow. We grow up, we grow old, we grow wiser, but past all that, there's something else, something deeper. Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches. Stay with me and you'll bear fruit. Or put another way, stay with me and you'll grow. But what does that mean for us? In 2020, in West Michigan, in our homes, in our communities. What does that mean for us, knowing that the message of the gospel seems irrelevant to the younger generations? What are we going to do to help connect with teens and young adults? Are we willing to abandon our comforts and preferences to reach people who need the gospel? Are we willing to allow this younger generation to shape our church culture and help us reach others? Are we going to sit on the sidelines and wait for someone else to do the work for us? Or are we willing to work hard and be growing young?
Good morning. I am so glad that you've joined us here this morning. Fair warning, I am going to throw an incredible amount of information at you. So, my encouragement is to take the afternoon to digest this before you digest any of the food you'll be eating for this game that is going to be played later. And maybe re-watch this, come back to it on our YouTube channel. We will have it up there. Just because there's going to be a lot brought your way. But if you hang with me here, and I think God has got some important things that He wants to share with us about young people today. To lead off, I want you to think back for a second about growing up. About you personally growing up. I want you to think what the world was like when you were a kid. I want you to think about the popular trends that were there. I want you to think about what TV shows were cool and new. I want you to think back and try to remember the first big world news event that you could remember. Maybe the first big national headline that you can remember. I want you to think back to that. I want you to think back to the sports heroes that you had as a child. Who they were, what season they were playing, what they did. I want you to think back to who had influence for you. Maybe it was a teacher or a parent. Maybe it was a grandparent. I want you to think back to who had influence in your life. I want you to think about the big innovation that you remember in your childhood. When mom and dad or grandma and grandpa, or maybe you saw it in the store, and the first time you laid eyes on that thing, you said, whoa, this is different. This is new. I want you to think back to that. I want you to think about what year it was when you were 20 years old. And what the world was like then. Everybody got a date in mind? Now insert a smartphone into that world. With unlimited internet access, instant information at your fingertips. What would that look like? Now I could easily ask how that would change your experience, but I think all of us would understand that, yes, that would greatly change our experience growing up. But I want to take that one step deeper this morning. If a smartphone were introduced into the world you grew up in, how would that have rewired your brain? How would that have rewired your expectations of life, of adults, and of everybody else around you? Keep that thought in the back of your mind this morning as we talk about empathizing with young people. As we continue our Growing Young series, we'll be looking at empathizing with young people today. And for some, this is a challenge. For some, this is difficult because we just simply don't understand what the world is like for young people today. And hopefully we'll start to scratch the surface of what that means. Now, empathy is something that I know people struggle with. Because as we're absorbed in our worlds, we're absorbed in all the things that are important to us, we lose sight of others. And it's hard to share that empathy. So for baseline definition, we need to talk about what empathy is. And the Stanford University Design School puts it like this. They say empathy is the work you do to understand people. It's your effort to understand the way they do things and why, their physical and emotional needs, how they think about the world, and what is meaningful to them. So this as our baseline, we want to jump into empathizing with young people today. Now, in your bulletins, you will see printed that there is a growing young circle. As we continue to work our way around this circle, as we continue to think about how we better encourage and reach young people and how they impact us, we keep going around this circle. We started thinking about our context. We started thinking about Jesus-centered community. Last week, Pastor Craig talked about keychain leadership and handing over the keys to this younger generation. And today we're going to talk about empathizing with young people today. So that is where we are at. Simply put, when we talk about empathy, empathy starts with understanding. To really empathize with someone, whether it's a young person, an old person, or anybody in between, we have to start learning and understanding and leading with curiosity to really dive into empathy. This morning, I'd like to start our journey to help understanding this current generation of young people, and I'd like to give you a glimpse of the world that they live in currently. Now, a few weeks ago, the college football national championship took place between the LSU Tigers and the Clemson Tigers, and they played this game. ESPN took the opportunity to ask some of the players, some of the high-profile players, mind you, about the world that they live in and what they remember about the 1990s. I want you to take a look at this.
I don't know who this is.
My name's Trevor Lawrence.
Grant Delpit.
Justin Ross. Jamar Chase.
I was born in 1999,
2000s.
1999,
1998.
1999.
2001.
I was born in 1999, and we're playing the game named the 90s.
What is this actually?
This is messaging? What is this?
Isn't this like a website or something?
This MySpace?
What?
This ain't MySpace?
What is this? What is that?
I don't know this one.
What is AOL? This a game?
I ain't never seen this before in my life either.
This is AOL. AOL.
Why do you know that?
I don't know. I really don't. I never even had one.
Online what?
Oh, I know. No, I know her name, bruh.
What's her name? Help me out. Help me out. Help me out.
It's gotta be Lindsay Lohan, Hillary Duff.
Lindsay Lohan.
Who is this?
I ain't never seen her before in my life.
The girl I was Zoe 101?
Britney Spears. I have seen her before in my life.
You know what's crazy? You tell you what I thought it was? Lady Gaga.
Lady Gaga. Nah, I know Britney Spears when I see her. Nah, they had to be born in 2000 or worse.
It's a movie player though, isn't it?
DVD player? VCR? That's the same thing, right?
VCR?
Come on, now that's a VCR. That go way back. No cap.
VCR? It's alright. I don't really remember that too much.
I thought this was gonna be hard.
Is this Romeo and Juliet?
No idea.
This is the Titanic. I actually cried to this movie when I was younger. When she let his hand go. But they was talking about that the whole movie, so. I was a baby. It's alright. I was like 12.
The TV show. The TV show. Is it Friends?
The Big Bang Theory?
What? I don't know none of this stuff.
This Friends, ain't it?
Seinfeld?
Seinfeld.
One of the biggest sitcoms of the 90s.
Seriously?
This the best show. This the best show.
It's Martin and Gina.
Come on. This is my favorite TV show, Martin.
Martin?
Come on now, this is Martin right here.
Okay.
Come on now.
I watch this legit every night.
Martin. Martin. I know that one. Are you an OO baby?
You said it's a Lady Gaga?
It's Britney. You know the rest.
What a glimpse into the world of our young people. I've got a couple other voices I want you to hear from this morning. And these are students from our youth group, so I'd like to invite Evan and Carson to the stage. We've got a few questions for them. And excited that they are here with us this morning. So guys, what year were you born?
2003.
2003. Okay, so 2003. And what is the first historical memory you have? World event, national news, whatever comes to mind. What's the first thing?
Probably the presidential election in
2008, okay.
Probably the first iPhone.
The release of the first iPhone, okay. Excellent. Now, as you turn to today, what is your favorite site or app that you spend the most time on?
I think probably Snapchat or TikTok.
Probably Instagram.
Snapchat, Instagram, and TikTok. Some of you are going, I have no idea what that is. And that's okay. That's fair. That's fair. Now, turning to some of the challenges that you guys face, what do you think is one of the biggest challenges your generation faces today?
I think as technology expands, probably the real-life conversations with people.
Okay.
Yeah, probably like face-to-face interaction, because we're kind of like consumed with our like screens, So it's hard to like talk to people.
Okay. All right. Good to know. And finally, as you guys are here and you're part of a youth group and you help serve a little bit, what would you name as your favorite part of being a part of Olivet or being part of the youth group?
I like going on like the trips and hanging out with them.
Yeah, probably just like the community, I guess, like how we're all kind of like together.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you guys. Give them a big hand coming up and helping out. Thank you guys. Guys, 2003, okay? So far in this series, we've talked a lot about young people and how we can do a better job of reaching them, connecting with them, and just getting a new set of lenses for ourselves as we reach people. We've talked about being a Jesus-centered community and letting that drive us first and foremost. Last week, we talked about keychain leadership and bringing young people into the fold to say, no, there's some ownership here that you need to have, and we value that so much, so much, so much. But let's define today, and what we're going to do is we're going to step back because there are two terms that you've probably heard but need a little context for. Those are millennial and Generation Z. Because we can talk a lot about helping young people and growing young, but if we really don't understand and don't know what this generation is or who they are or what year they were born, it's going to be harder to empathize and understand the world that they've grown up in. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a little deeper dive into who millennials and Gen Z are and see also how God and how Jesus view young people. And then we're going to look at practically how that can help shape our church moving forward as we want to empathize with young people today. So, social scientists will put the number around when millennials were born between 1989 and 2000. The big marker that most researchers will put on a generational gap, especially this recent one, is the terrorist attack on September 11th. So they will mark millennials and Gen Z by this event. Because anybody born after 2001 was reading about 9/11 in a history book, or they saw the TV special. For people born before then, a lot of them grew up and were in formative years when that event happened, and they watched the news coverage and they watched it happen on television. And so that formative moment in time marks the generation. So Gen Z then was born 2001 and after. Some researchers will break that up just a little bit differently, but for the most part, Generation Z, as they're known, was born between 2001 and 2019. And what we see here is that they view the future and have a sense of identity. They're very different. If you look at these ages and understand where they were born, they fit into our 15 to 29-year-old category, which is what we're approaching with growing young, but they view life very differently, and we have to understand that. For millennials, their view of the future is YOLO. This is an acronym. Some of you are snickering, and that's good. YOLO stands for you only live once. And so the approach to life is let's try everything. Life is a buffet, and they gave me a plate. Let's try everything. And so we are not necessarily afraid of change, and we will try nearly everything. And so our approach to the future is not quite reckless abandonment, but it's real close. And so YOLO is the view that we have of the future. For Gen Z, it's a little bit different. They view the future as FOMO, which is another acronym for fear of missing out. Because one of the things that we see with Generation Z is that they don't want to miss anything. And so what we're seeing, and Justin McFarland will tell you this in youth ministry, and I've seen it myself being a youth pastor for many number of years, is that young people today will wait to commit to an event, to going to a trip, to doing something, just to make sure that nothing else is going to come along that is going to be better or going to be more interesting. And so they will wait and wait and wait until the very last minute, and then Justin McFarland will get text, say, hey, can I go? Hey, can I go to this? Well, the registration was a month ago. I don't care. Can I go? And we make a way. We find a way. But Gen Z view of the future is, I don't want to miss out. I want to make sure I see absolutely everything and utilize my time the best of my ability. There's some value in that, but it also can be absolutely infuriating for some people trying to plan things like trips and events. We also have a sense of identity that is very different. Millennials have the sense of identity, and again, this is just, think of the world we grew up in. Millennials have the sense of identity that say, I am awesome. Now, think about the world that they grew up in. Parents, teachers, coaches. What was the message? You're awesome. Every step along the way. Hey, you're awesome. I know you probably could have done better on that, but you know what? You're awesome. Hey, I know we lost the game and it was sad, but you know what? You're still awesome. You know, I know you should have cleaned your room and it should have been spick and span, but you didn't do it, but you know what? You're still awesome. After a while, that thought gets planted in your head and it carries over to adulthood. Well, you know and I know that adulthood, sometimes things aren't awesome and sometimes you're not awesome. But that is the overarching narrative and sense of identity. What's interesting is what happened to Gen Z. Gen Z's sense of identity, which is currently playing out right before us, they look at life and they say, I am fluid. So instead of being tied down to some social construct or something that has been around for millennia or forever, they say, no, I'm going to be a lot more fluid. I'm going to be a lot more flexible. And we see this play out in a lot of different ways. We see this play out in social structures. We see this play out in sexual identity and orientation. We see this play out in things that they want to do, where they're interested in one thing and all of a sudden, I'm going to flex and I'm going to be interested in something else. I'm going to be very fluid. So the way that they approach life, the way that they look at life is dramatically different. Church, we have to understand this as we want to jump into empathizing with young people today. Because it's different than maybe what you're used to or what we grew up with. Millennials, on another note, just took over from baby boomers as the largest working population in the country. And so knowing this, it kind of shapes what we do and how we do it. I want us to take a look at a second at this chart that is in your bulletin as well. Because this has the narratives of the 5 generations and the way that they kind of came of age. We're not going to do a real deep dive on this chart this morning, but I wanted you to have this in hand. You put this on the fridge or keep it in your Bibles just as a reminder that generations and people see the world differently. There's no right or wrong here, but we've got to understand that the lens that young people are looking at life through is different than maybe what you and I look at life through. The 2 things that are really interesting on this are the bottom 2 rows, the life paradigm and the attitude toward authority. And the bigger thing I want us to see as we look at this life paradigm here is the way that it shifts. So our builders, our silent generation, our oldest generation, their life paradigm is just be grateful with the job you have. Just be grateful that you have a job. Okay? Very, very conservative, very, very cautious, and that's okay. Think about the world that they grew up in. Moving on to baby boomers, where their life paradigm says, I saw what the generation before me had, and I deserve better. I want better. So it's a little more confident. But watch it swing again with our busters, our Gen X. They say, keep it real. I want a more conservative approach. I want real life. Don't give me all the fake stuff. I want real life. It's more cautious. Then our millennials come and they say, life is a cafeteria. They built me a buffet. I got my plate. Let's do this. It's more confident. And now as we move to Gen Z, as they know as homelanders, they're saying, I am coping and hoping. I am coping with the stresses of life, and I am hoping for a better tomorrow. They're more cautious. Do you see how this pendulum swings from cautious to confident, and cautious to confident, and cautious to confident, so on and so on and so forth? So when we read about young people struggling with stress and anxiety, it's real and it's here. Now, in setting this up, there were a lot of people that had the question of, underneath the generational boomers, it says pig and python generation. There were some people that had a question on that, and rightly so. What the researchers were doing, this is from Growing Leaders, which is a great resource for people who are interested in studies like this. Pig and a python generation means if you think about a python eating a pig, okay, sorry, it's gruesome, but that's what we got. Okay? If you think about a python eating a pig, when that snake eats the pig, it takes all of its energy. Baby boomers in the generation that is there is such a big swath of population. It takes all of the energy of the society and culture to digest this group of people. So that is the pig in the python as it digests. So society is now digesting this group of people as they get older and as they move into different stages of life and retirement and so on and so forth. And so the other interesting title I wanted to point your attention to is Homelanders. Because Gen Z are known as Homelanders because they were born after the installation of Homeland Security. If you think about the world that they lived in after 2001, they know what it's like to go to the airport and be, searched by Homeland Security. They know it. That's a world they grew up in. So we've got to understand where they're coming from. What's interesting about this chart, on the very end, on the right-hand side, there's this life paradigm and then there's this attitude toward authority. The life paradigm for Gen Z is I'm coping and hoping. And you would think that they would be looking for adults to help them with this. But what's interesting here is then their attitude toward authority. I'm not sure I need you. And that's, I think, where a lot of the confusion lies with many of us who are trying to help and impact this younger generation. Because we look at it and say, man, you're really dealing with stress and anxiety and pain and hurt, and we can help with that. But then they got Google. They have a search engine on their phone. They don't think they necessarily need that authority. And this is where we as a church can gently and graciously help in that as we empathize with young people today. But before we dive any further into this study, because I could spend hours talking about this, and we got canned fruit, but nobody else packed a lunch. I want us to dive into, just for a few moments, Jesus' attitude toward young people. Because I think if we start there and kind of work our way out of it, we will see that God has some very important things to say about young people and our attitude and our vision for them. So we're going to start this morning in the book of Matthew. For those that working on navigating the Bible, Matthew is the first book in the New Testament. So if you go halfway through and just kind of a little bit further, it's going to be right there. Matthew was written to a Jewish audience. And so as Matthew is writing this gospel, as he's writing this book, you are going to see flavored throughout of it Old Testament prophecies saying, Jesus did this and it fulfilled this. It is again pointing to this very Jewish audience saying, nope, here's the Messiah. Here's Jesus. This is who he is. If you think about the Sermon on the Mount, which is also found in Matthew, you can almost hear Jesus saying, you have heard it said, you have heard it said. Well, every time he drops that phrase, it is pointing people to the Old Testament law. And then he's coming in to fulfill it and redefine it. So as we think about that context, and then we read about what Jesus is going to tell us about young people, it's striking to see what he's doing and how countercultural it is. So we're in Matthew chapter 18, verses 1 through 10, and we'll kind of jump around here a little bit in the book of Matthew, so stay with me. Matthew 18. It was about that time the disciples came to Jesus and asked, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? It's a very millennial question. Jesus called a little child to him. He put the child among them. Think about that image. Then he said, I tell you the truth, unless you turn from your sins and become like little children, you will never get into the kingdom of heaven. So anyone who becomes as humble as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And anyone who welcomes a little child like this on my behalf is welcoming me. But if you cause one of these little ones who trust in me to fall into sin, it would be better for you to have a large millstone tied around your neck and be drowned in the depths of the sea. He says a little bit later, beware that you don't look down on any of these little ones. For I tell you that in heaven their angels will always be in the presence of my heavenly Father. We also turn to Matthew chapter 9. And we see what Jesus does here in Matthew chapter 9. He says, as Jesus was saying this, the leader of a synagogue came and knelt before him. My daughter has just died. But you can bring her back to life again if you just come and lay your hand on her. So Jesus and the disciples got up and went with him. When Jesus arrived at the official's home, he saw the noisy crowd and heard the funeral music. Get out, he told them. The girl isn't dead. She's only asleep. But the crowd laughed at him. After the crowd was put outside, however, Jesus went in and took the girl by the hand, and she stood up. The report of this miracle swept through the entire countryside. And finally, we turn our attention to Matthew chapter 17. And it says this. At the foot of the mountain, a large crowd was waiting for them being the disciples. A man came and knelt before Jesus and said, Lord, have mercy on my son. He has seizures and suffers terribly. He often falls into the fire or into the water. So I brought him to your disciples, but they couldn't heal him. Jesus said, you faithless and corrupt people, how long must I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring the boy here to me. Then Jesus rebuked the demon from the boy, and it left him. And from that moment, the boy was well. Friends, as the gospel writer Matthew puts this gospel together with the events and accounts of Jesus, he's telling a very clear story. He's painting a very clear picture. He says, Jesus welcomed kids and young people. He started with his disciples and saying, guys, no, you need to welcome, you need to have the humility, you need to have the curiosity, the faith of one of these young ones to enter into the kingdom. They were welcomed. You see Jesus going to these leaders' homes to heal children, to say, I believe in you and you have enough value and you have enough for me to come and bring healing to you. He could have left them out. He could have said, no, I'm not going to waste my time with the kids. No. He welcomed kids and young people. That was his attitude. What's fascinating is beyond just welcoming them, Jesus had a place in his kingdom for them. So it wasn't just enough to have them around. It wasn't just enough to have them on the outsides and just kind of watching. No. They had a place in the kingdom. Had a place in the kingdom for them. This group of people were not afterthoughts. They were prominent. I mean, when you're told by Jesus that these little ones are to be the example of faith and humility, it should cause us to sit up a little bit and go, okay, well, we should pay attention to them now. You know, often we boil this down to having a childlike faith. We've heard sermons about this. We've talked about this in a lot of different places. And that's certainly true. But I think what we do sometimes is that we shortchange this. We don't really develop what it means to have the faith and humility of a child. We make certain assumptions about what that would mean that we almost feel like we turn our brains off and just go, okay, Jesus, yeah, sure, whatever, that's cool, no big deal. But if you've served in children's ministry, or if you've raised kids at all, you know that they don't turn their brains off. In fact, there's a level of curiosity there that sometimes downright just makes us irritated. I have a 4-year-old. And why is a very important question to him. Their minds are complex. They have questions. They're thinking through what is being presented to them. So it's not just the childlike faith of turn your brain off and go, okay, yeah, sure, whatever. No, they're thinking through it. They're doing this with humility because they simply don't understand, they don't know. That's how Jesus wants us to approach him and this. To say, Lord, we don't really understand, we don't really know, but Lord, teach us, give us wisdom, give us grace Lord, we need that for ourselves, for our families, and we need that for young people. So hopefully we know that Jesus had a place for his kingdom. Also, I want you to think about this. Think about how much more excited you are to go somewhere when you know that there's a place for you. Think about how much more excited you are when you know that you have a role, a responsibility, that you are valued. Think about if you're going to work and you know your workplace values you. It's not as hard to get up in the morning, is it? You're almost, heaven forbid, excited to get to work if they value you. Think about what it would look like to have a church that values young people so much that they get up and they go, you know what? It's Sunday. We doing it, okay? They're excited. I want you to think about how valuable it is to make sure that we are a place that has a spot for young people. We talked about it last week, and that will be a theme that we continue through, that young people have a place, not only in God's kingdom, but hopefully our church as well. And finally, as we read these accounts of Jesus, we see his attitudes that he had. We see that Jesus challenged older adults in their attitudes toward young people. In the Jewish community, an older person was supposed to be the example and leading the way in matters of faith and life. And in following Jesus, he was very clear about children, saying, no, you need to be like them. You need to have the humility like them. You need to have the genuine curiosity about life and me and everything else like they do. That would have challenged an older Jewish population. Say, whoa, who is this guy? Who's telling us to be like those? No, these are the little kids. I don't think so. We're reminded even last week, as Pastor Craig mentioned, about the disciples, as how they were called between the ages of 13 and 30. Because as a rabbi, you would call people who were younger than you. So Jesus being 30, his posse, his crew, his disciples would have been younger than he was. So there's a clear spot for young people, and Jesus challenged some of the thoughts and ideas around young people and what they were valued by and for. Now, as we think about this, I know that there's a common phrase over and over and over again about challenge and about young people, and especially about millennials, and that we can't soften our stances with young people, that our older generation is just going to buckle down and say, this is how it is and this is how it's going to be. And we just don't frankly care if the snowflakes can handle it or not, because that's the way life is, right? But before we have that thought train leave the station, we're just going to pause, and I want you to ask yourself why. In this context and in our today's context, I want you to ask yourself why. Why would Jesus value these people? Why would Jesus have this attitude toward young people? And then I want you to turn that into today. And I want you to ask why. When we think about Gen Z and we think about millennials, we've got to ask why. Why are millennials considered snowflakes by some? Why is the term entitled follow them around? We have to ask the why question that leads to genuine curiosity. Why are these generations the most anxious in history? Why are these generations seemingly focused on everything else but faith? Why are these generations more apt to text you about your faith and about their faith instead of having a face-to-face conversation? We just heard it from Evan and Karsten. The biggest challenge they're going to have is a face-to-face conversation. We have to ask why. When we start asking and leading with this why question, we start leading with genuine curiosity. And as we lead toward empathy, we're starting to understand and hopefully lead with this why question. Now, just as we ask this why question, millennials and Gen Z have their own set of questions that they've been asking. They have their own set of questions that they've been wrestling with, and it's questions that I know you and I have wrestled with as well. The book Growing Young calls them the 3 ultimate questions. To think through, how do young people do this and how do they define it? And as soon as you see it, you'll go, oh, I've already answered some of those. And the 3 ultimate questions young people are asking, and hopefully we are too, who am I? They're asking, where do I fit? And they're asking, what difference do I make? We're going to take a second and dive a bit deeper into each of these questions. But we've got to see, as you're filling this out, there's a little parentheses around the question right after it. And I want you to see how that's filled in. Ultimately, when people ask, who am I? They're asking questions on identity. They want to know, what is my core? What is my being? What is at the root of who I am? When they ask, where do I fit? They're really looking for belonging. Where do I belong? Where will I fit? And how will I integrate into this group, whatever that group is? And 3, what difference do I make? They're looking, and we hopefully are looking for a sense of purpose. We know young people are asking these questions in subtle and not so subtle ways. And hopefully we will see as a church what an opportunity to help guide and shape a young person in finding answers to these questions. Hopefully you have wrestled with these yourself. And you have come to some understanding of what this means. And if you have not, we'd love to have the conversation. We'd love to talk about identity and belonging and purpose in this world that Jesus has given us. So we'll come back to these in a moment. Because to start understand how we can better answer these questions, we must first understand how young people are answering them already, because they are. Young people are already answering these questions, and we may not like the answers, and we may not like how they're doing this. We've got to understand that as they're answering these questions, the journey that they're having in adulthood has sped up and also slowed down at the same time. First, we'll talk about the slowed down side, because it's pretty easy to grasp. The median age for the first marriage today is 27 years old. That's 5 years younger than the previous generation. 5 years younger. Many of you can think back when you were first married, and you think about how young you were. And you project that onto today, and you go, wow, I was really young. I mean, I was 21 years old when I got married. The median age now for first marriage is 27. Life and these big life markers are happening later. Same holds true for the first child. Median age for a first child is 26. Again, this is the norm. I also want you to recognize what is actually happening with young people. Because what's happening is the median age for the first child is 26, meaning that they're having children before sometimes they're having their marriages. We have to recognize that this isn't out of sync. This is the norm for today. We don't have to like it, but we have to understand contextually what it means for us to go to a hurting world where this is the norm. Sometimes I feel like we're a little isolated in our bubble because we just like our good Christian stuff and it's all good and everything, and we kind of miss the normal trends that are happening. And this is it, guys. This is the world we live in. I wish I could tell you the news was going to get better for the next 10 minutes, but it's not. Sorry. On the sped up side of jumping to adulthood, we see that 15 is the new 25. In recent years, we've seen how capable and creative young people are. In a variety of ways, young people can carry out incredible things and hold an intense amount of responsibility. We've seen them organize rallies. We've seen them put together apps. We've seen them put together all sorts of creative and beautiful things. We've seen them impact their communities in ways that we would never dream possible. We put a lot of responsibility on a 15-year-old, especially if we give them a smartphone. We say, here you go. Here's an entire life encyclopedia. Use it wisely. 15 is the new 25. It's absolutely fascinating. But the inverse is also true. 25 is the new 15. Often caring adults, which is what we've seen, caring adults have sometimes tried to shelter these young peoples from some of the responsibilities that are needed to live a well-adjusted and healthy adult life. For example, when I was in high school, if I forgot my lunch money, I was out of luck. I didn't have a smartphone, wasn't going to text mom and dad, and I sure didn't have change to make a payphone call because our school still had a payphone. So what did I do? I had to actually ask a friend, hey, do you got some money I could bum? Or maybe ask a teacher or a coach, or if I got real creative, I'd just smile and wink at a lunch lady and write an IOU, and boom, lunch was served, and that's how it was. But the growing trend over the last 20 years is very different. Because if a student forgets something, homework, lunch money, it's a quick text. Hey mom, hey dad, hey grandma, hey grandpa, auntie, uncle, please, I need help. Now, this is not all bad all the time. Okay, I want to be very clear about that. Helping our students in time of need is important. But watch what happens if this happens again and again and again and again and again and again. It becomes the expectation. That shapes how they look at life. That shapes how they look at work. That shapes how they look at other adults. And so while it is important and we can be helpful with young people, we have to be careful not to enable. And so what happens is that when they reach adulthood and they reach this stage where you're supposed to have some more life markers, like having a relationship and getting a full-time job and buying a house and buying a car and doing everything else, some of those skills are not built up. Because all along the way, something has bailed them out. It happens, guys. I understand. Many of you are probably familiar with the term helicopter parenting. Anybody know that one? Helicopter parenting? Most? Okay. There's a new trend that's coming out, though. The new reality for some kids isn't the helicopter, it's the lawnmower. The lawnmower parent does this. They get in the lawnmower, they see all of the awkwardness and pain and strife and struggle. They get behind the lawnmower and they mow right over it. And what's left behind is a very manicured-looking lawn where their students and their young people just kind of walk through, not experiencing the pain, agony, struggle of life. We've seen this in the news recently for those that are familiar with the college admissions scandal. 7 major schools, USC, Yale, Texas, Cal, Wake Forest, Georgetown, and others, were caught taking bribes from 33 parents totaling $25 million. So that these 33, this set of parents could have their kids attend these very prestigious schools. So in some senses, parents going to illegal routes to make sure that their kids have the opportunity. What's fascinating about this is as they were interviewing one of the college students who benefited from this, who had then been moved on to another university, she asked her mom, "Mom, why didn't you believe in me?" And I think our young people are asking that all the time. Why didn't you believe in me? Because they're capable and they're strong. But we also understand that they need some guidance and support too. We see this at 15 as the new 25 and 25 as the new 15. What we see in terms of moving toward adulthood is that we have an earlier starting line as young people hit puberty earlier and earlier, 11, 12, 13 years old, and they're having a much later finish line with these big life markers in 26, 27, 28. So as we think about this, we have to understand that the race is longer. And if you think about a race to adulthood, the longer it is, the more awkward you get, and the more weird it gets, and the harder it is, the more stress and anxiety build up, and it hurts. It's painful. Maybe you can think about when you went through adolescence and you were maybe 14, 15 years old, and by the time you hit 21, hey, I'm done. I got my driver's license. I can drink. I can smoke. Not that anybody would do that here. I can gamble. Not that anybody would do that here. And by 21, you could do nearly everything. And maybe you were already married. That was your experience. The race is much longer now. Add in a smartphone, and we start to see why students battle with anxiety and stress. What we see as they try to answer the big questions that we just talked about in this longer race is that they're having some different responses. As they search for identity, we have pervasive stress and a peripheral faith. Now, I printed these because I want you to go back to them, and if you want to think about how I can pray for young people, pray through this. As they search for identity, they are stressed. The American Psychological Association released its recent study on young people and found that most students today have the same level of anxiety as a psychiatric patient in the 1950s. Most all of them. They're hurting. They're struggling. And this anxiety and stress, and in it they are struggling to find things to hold on to. Normally, some people would say, well, they should hold on to their faith. And that's just not happening because their faith is peripheral. It's outside. That's not something that is in their inner core. Now, what's interesting is as researchers study young people in the U.S. today, they see that the young people aren't hostile toward faith. Now, before you jump up and down and say, yes, here's an opportunity, just understand that they're not hostile to faith because mainly they don't care. That's the reality we live in. We're starting at ground zero. And as they race toward adulthood, as they ask this question of belonging, they're finding belonging in all sorts of other places: digital technology, sexual experimentation, and then they're finding it in adult abandonment. What's happening is that these 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds are projecting so much maturity that we as adults go, hey, they got it figured out. They don't need us anymore. They got their smartphones and Google. Have fun. And it's artificial. It's not real. And so what we have to do is scale things back and say, okay, guys, we're here for you. We're here for you. And we want to understand what you're going through. And as they search for purpose, young people come to this jaded realism. They say they've seen the world, they've seen it broken, they've seen it painful, they've seen all of the other things, and say, no, I don't want that. We see a country nearly splitting at the seams. This is the world they grew up in. They've also been handed, again, the cultural buffet of pluralism. And they say, here you go, here's your plate, enjoy. Pick and choose. Friends, we have just scratched the surface of young people. My encouragement to you is to not stop here. Again, we've had to digest a lot, so come back to this. But before we leave, I want to give you a few things that we can do right now. Okay? And I wrote that in all caps because your head's probably spinning a little bit, and I understand mine is too. Okay? What do we do? First, rewind to your own journey. Think back. I had you do it at the start. Think back to how you grew up. In an attempt to empathize with young people, think back to how you grew up and then insert a smartphone. It's different. You have some of the same struggles, some of the same identity questions, but they're finding answers in very different places. We have to understand that. We have to empathize with that and say maybe there's some better resources we can hand off. Maybe there's some better conversations that we can have. We have to rewind our own journey. We also have to stereotype no more. For some, this will be the biggest struggle you have because it is so easy to make millennials and Gen Z the target of your own angst. You look at the culture and society and you say, it is their fault, it is their problem. My encouragement to you, church, is not to paint this entire generation with a broad brush. Please don't. And I have to admit, I've heard this here at Olivet, at both campuses, from a lot of people. Now, most don't realize I'm a millennial. Yes, I am. Most people don't stop to think that maybe I'm in this category, but I am. And to hear these stereotypes fairly regularly is discouraging. I mean, I get them, I understand. But it comes across as discouraging, unwelcoming. And if that were overheard by another young person, it would be a clear sign that they would not be understood here and they would maybe not be welcomed here. And church is the last place that a person should feel that way. I'm reminded of Jesus talking to the disciples after an argument broke out about who would sit at his left and his right hand. And Jesus said, other people argue about such things, disciples, not so with you. Church, we cannot stereotype anymore. Not so with you. When it comes to the stereotypes of Gen Z and millennials, the words of Jesus need to be repeated, not so with you. And if you hear someone going quickly to those talking points that are so comfortable at times, please gently nudge them to seek understanding about the world that young people live in today. And when you see something new, when you see something confusing, even maybe offensive to you in culture and society, stop and ask why. Stop and ask why. That will lead to curiosity. That will lead to empathy. Today, my encouragement to you is you go home and at 6:30 turn on this game that's going to be a bowl, I guess. In the presentation, if you see something new, confusing, maybe even offensive to you, you don't have to like it. But you got to ask why. Why are people driven to this? Why are people drawn to this? Why do people laugh at this? Some of this stuff is silly. Why? And start going down that road. We also need to walk through our church and worship service with the eyes of a young person. Andy Stanley, our pastor in Georgia, puts it best. He reminds us when it comes to this that time erodes awareness of. Meaning this, the longer that you've been in an organization, whether it's your workplace or maybe a church, the longer you've been in a building, the longer you've been somewhere, the less you are likely to see some of the oddities. Because you've gone eyes blind to some of the stuff that young people would look at and go, no, that's weird. So take a moment, take a step back and walk through our church and our worship service with a new set of eyes, asking the important questions. And finally, as we seek to empathize with young people today, respond with grace, love, and mission. If you think about the three questions that we asked, who am I? Where do I fit? And what do I do? What is my purpose? What difference do I make? We need to respond with grace. Who am I? I'm a grace-filled, loving person who loves Jesus and wants to love people young and old. We have to respond with grace. When we think about what our job is in a sense of belonging, we need to respond with love. To say, you know what? Jesus loved us when we were broken and sinners and pain. He welcomes these young people as well. And finally, when we ask, what do? We lead with mission. To say Jesus has called us to something greater, something bigger than ourselves. To share this message of faith and hope and love and grace and redemption and salvation to a hurting world. To help alleviate some pain of people who are on the margins, the widows, the orphans, the homeless, the people in pain. That is our call. So friends, as we empathize with young people today, I hope we're leading with the right responses. And I hope we're leading with a genuine sense of curiosity about who God is, about who these young people are, and how we can connect together. As we close, would you pray with me as we seek God's wisdom?